everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wisdom Chat. I'm your host, Phil Holdsworth of Aurum Gold, and my guest today is Andrea Edmondson, who works with people and leaders in the area of brain science to help improve performance, leadership, lots of things. It's quite an in-depth world. It's quite a wide world, but it's quite significant and impactful. And I've invited Andrea to join me today because this is an area that we feel we somehow need to develop an understanding around that will impact lots of different facets of our lives, not just finances, but our relationships, our attitudes at work, at home, wherever it may be, that we can become better versions of ourselves if we understand ourselves a little bit better. So, hello, Andrea. Thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Phil. Thank you for inviting me.
And I hope I did you at least a little bit of justice in my description.
As I said to you before, I find introducing myself quite difficult because it depends on what context I'm in. So, but thank you for the introduction.
That's okay. I'm very sort of not just intrigued and fascinated, but also really believe there's something quite significant in understanding the area of brain science without making things too complex. And for our listeners, we're not about to go into, scientific terminology and things like that, but we really want to help you understand a little bit more about perhaps how your brain ticks, or the fact that you can change when perhaps you believe you can't. How does that sound, Andrea?
That sounds interesting. I think one of the things is that, we're talking about brain science, but really we're talking about neuroscience. So when we use the word neuroscience, we're encompassing the brain, the spinal cord, and all the things that come from that. And we need to start seeing the nervous system as a continuous loop of information. Body, brain, body, brain, brain, body. There's no differentiation between the brain and the body. They are working as one. And that nervous system really impacts everything that we do at a behavior level. But there's a lot of things under the surface that are working below our level of awareness.
Yeah. I remember reading a book called Molecules of Emotions by Dr. Candice Pert. She's sadly no longer with us. But back in the 1970s, she discovered in the science world what we would call receptors within the body. The body's full of them. In essence, she termed the body as the mind. And as I read through the book, one of the things that really struck me was that this might be oversimplifying it a little bit, but if I take the brain as being like the computer center, it's firing all this information out, and that's going through the nervous system, and using the body, it's finding the appropriate receptors to receive that information to get the body to respond, whether it's something we are conscious about or certainly it's things that we're not conscious about. We don't necessarily think about breathing or think, I must think about pumping my heart today to make it work. We don't think about those things, and yet these things are happening automatically within us. And then there's other things going on, but it's sending signals all around the body as opposed to in the head.
That's an interesting thing is that, you've spoken about the brain sending signals, but interestingly, the science is telling us the body is sending signals. In fact, 80% of the signals are from our bottom up, are from the body to the brain.
Right.
And that's quite an interesting thing, is that we've always kind of believed that the brain's in charge, and the brain is super important. And I'm not underestimating it, it's the most complex thing known to man, and it's really important. But our bodies are also involved in the things that we do on a daily basis. So it's both parts.
So would you say then that the brain's function is very much to process all these signals and to interpret them and deal with them in a manner that it needs to deal with them? And I know there are times when there's interruptions, whether it's things like dementia, Alzheimer's, or things like that, where brain signals are interrupted. However, on a general sort of day-to-day, irrespective of those things, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the body is getting all these inputs, which we know, sensations. We've got these sensations inside us. How much oxygen is in my blood? How much carbon dioxide? My glucose. We have all these internal signals, and then we have our external signals, and all of that is going to our brain, and it's processing it. Some processing will be done below awareness. That's almost reflexive. And then more processing when we're doing it in the thinking part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, is more deliberate. And that can be uncomfortable sometimes when we have to work at something, we have that struggle.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, for example, stress, because we know that when somebody is under stress or anxious, the likelihood of them being able to make a rational and logical sort of decision is impaired to varying degrees. We're not all equals in that sense, but some their threshold is perhaps a little higher. But we always say to people in the financial world, never make an important financial decision when you're stressed. Make sure that you're not in that area when making those decisions, or delay those decisions. And
I think the tricky thing with that nowadays is that a lot of people don't even realize they are stressed.
Yeah.
So I'm using that word really, I want to use that word really carefully, stress, because we need the right amount of stress to get up in the morning and to perform at our best. We need stress to pay attention. We need stress to learn, but just the right amount. But a lot of people I see and hear are going around their daily lives with an excess level of stress. And it's become normal to them.
Yeah.
So they never have a period of time when they don't have the higher level of stress. And that high level of stress is impacting the way their brain works and the way their body functions. So all the decisions they are making potentially are not coming from that rational part of the brain where they've balanced out all the pros and cons. So I think that's one of the things that we're seeing a lot, especially right now with the cost of living crisis, is people are feeling under threat moment to moment, day by day, and that is there all the time. So I did a workshop last week with a company, and there were a lot of different stresses that we discussed, but I'd say out of the 20 people in the room, 5 people mentioned money.
Right.
But actually, once we finished having the conversation, they realized that it was, they were thinking about it in a certain way, which was exacerbating the stress. And actually, they took a step back and got a different perspective. They could see it differently, and that actually lowered the stress. But they had become so entwined in their own thinking about the money that was raising their stress levels, and it was keeping them stuck in a state of heightened stress where they couldn't resolve the problem. So there's the kind of a stress cycle that can get created by not just how we feel in our body, and that could be from not sleeping well, or it could be from eating an unhealthy food, or not having the right nutrients, or not having enough social connection. And then it's compounded by the way our brain thinks about those situations.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of that. While you were talking, I was reminded, going back to the point that you say that sometimes we don't even realize we're stressed. And I can vouch for that, because I can remember several years ago just having a pain in my arm and not really knowing what this was about, couldn't work out what was going on. And so I went to see the doctor, and the doctor it was almost like an interview. He was firing lots of questions at me. And after a while, I realized where he was going, because he was leading towards like a repetitive strain injury. So he was asking me questions about what was my work. And I said that I worked at a computer. I would spend a lot of time at the desk and so on. So do you do a lot of typing? I said, not overly. But I knew that that's where he was going. And I said, just so you're aware, I teach ergonomics. So I teach about posture. I teach about the use of your keyboard, screen heights, and all that side. And I said that I know it's not repetitive strain injury because of the use of the keyboard. So I said something else is clearly going on. So he asked me a few more questions and eventually said, "You're stressed." And I was quite surprised because it wasn't an area I'd really thought about. But when I said to him, I said, "Well, I can't think of any reason why I'm stressed. How do you work that one out?" And then he started to tell me about the fact that stress has an uncanny way of revealing itself. And it can be different for different peoples, from digestive problems to cardiovascular issues to muscular pains. There was all sorts of things that he was going through. And he says it just has this uncanny way of revealing itself. But I knew at that point, in order for me to try and identify, well, where was this coming from? Why did he think I was under stress? I perhaps needed somebody else really to talk with, to be able to see some of the things that perhaps I couldn't see. They were part of my shadow side.
I think that's really interesting because when I work with individuals or groups, I do a stress load analysis, and I encourage them to look at stress using the 6 domains. So I look at biological stresses, we look at emotion, cognitive, social, pro-social, and spiritual, and really do a deep dive into each of those, because often it's not the big things that we actually often don't have control over. It's all the little things that add up to create this stress load. And then we also need to compare that stress load to our window of tolerance. That window of tolerance is how much stress, excess stress, can we handle? And that will often be linked to our upbringing and our childhood experience. Some people will have a much bigger window of tolerance than others. And we also have things like context. Is this person part of a really close social group or family? That will mitigate the reaction to that stress load. So there are so many factors individuals need to be aware of. So first of all, how does it feel for me? Where is it showing up? What are those hidden stressors? What ones can I control? What ones can't? And to understand that the human brain has evolved and body has evolved, and our first response to stress is social engagement. It's to seek the support or to seek the company of another human. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are struggling nowadays with hybrid working, with COVID. I'm seeing it a lot of it in schools, is that we have removed some of these natural, easy social interactions. And so people's stress levels are raised because they don't have that. When we're looking at the brain, we have an oxytocin. Lots of things happen in the brain when we are with other human beings.
Yeah, we are, in terms of our makeup, more social creatures. There are variations. So, for example, between myself and my wife, I would say I'm a quiet extrovert. My wife is certainly an introvert. So, albeit that she likes people and she likes being with people, she also likes and needs time out to recuperate and process. Whereas I get my batteries charged by being with people. So put me in a party, great.
It's brilliant that both your wife and you recognise that of how you're wired. And that's, I think, it's again that back to that awareness. How do I feel in the moment? What do I need right now? What stresses are impacting my stress load? What are my options? So there's a lot of work the individual can do. And I think when we're looking at financial well-being within an organization or in a business, it's empowering those individuals, because there's no one size fits all. But it's digging deeper. For some people, it might be what they eat, how they sleep. Some people, it might be money worries. Some people, it might be children. There's all sorts of places. So if you can help individuals understand those places and how it affects them, then we not only create stronger, healthier employees, we create better places to work. And actually, I think we improve the bottom line.
Yeah, we do. I completely agree with you. And I think as well, I would throw into there the mix of the beliefs that people and values that people hold. One of the questions would be, are they their beliefs and their values, or are they carrying somebody else's? And oftentimes when you talk with different individuals, it's interesting what comes out in the conversation about what they remember, what they heard, what they saw, what they experienced as a child growing up, watching, like in my case, watching other people in terms of how they handled their money, and how they then grew up with certain beliefs that, without them realizing, influences their choices. And one example, I had a client who said to me, and was very proud of this, that they were very good at managing their money. They knew what was coming in, they knew what was going out. They had a really good system of controlling what was going on and knowing where they were at any point in time. And I just happened to ask them, how often do you check your money? It was an interesting conversation because it went through stages till eventually they admitted that they checked their money several times a day. And I said simply, what are you afraid of? And they turned to me and just literally said, do you know what? I am so stressed. And then they recounted a story of an aunt. And I think I've said this in the public domain, growing up saying you must save. And this message was almost like hammered home every time they saw their aunt. And they saw their aunt on a regular basis, to the point whereby they literally couldn't spend money on themselves now as an adult without feeling completely guilty and ashamed and letting their aunt down. And yet that wasn't their value and their belief.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, what we don't realize is that so much of our beliefs and our values are kind of instilled in us during childhood, because there's a biological imperative that a child connect with adults, especially their primary carer. So the child is the one that adapts, not the adult.
Yes.
They need to be looked after and they need to be cared for, even if the adult's behavior is not healthy or helpful. The child will accept it for what it is because they need to be connected.
There's
not until later that we start to go,
There's a couple of things there, because when I think about, we're having a conversation the other day about languages with somebody who teaches languages, and they said it was so much easier for children to learn languages than for adults to learn them. It's not to say we couldn't, but it's easier. They seem to adapt to it much easier than an adult does. So that was one thing.
That's because the brain is incredibly plastic until 25. So children and the young brain it learns almost passively. It just absorbs. So, but however, when we get to when the brain's fully mature, about 25, the processes change. And we have to then use self-directed neuroplasticity to change our brain. So the brain can change at any age, but the process changes about 25. So it's understanding what that process is and what ingredients you need to create that change. So we need certain chemicals in place. But fortunately, this is why we go to school. This is why if you expose a child to 3 languages, they will learn 3 languages. Experience and a rich environment is so important for young people.
I had to laugh one time. I was in I think it was Tenerife, and I'm one of these people, I don't like to go to the parts where all the holiday makers are, the commercial side of it. I like to find out about the indigenous population, their culture and lifestyles and things like this. And as we were walking around, we called in to a shop. There was a young lady serving in the shop, and we just got chatting with her, really friendly. And I just happened to ask the question, how many languages did she speak? And then she looked at me and she said, oh, I only speak 7 languages. But the way she said it was, I'm ashamed. I only speak 7 languages. And I'm just thinking, I only speak 1, really. What does that say of me? But it's interesting, isn't it? The mindset, how the beliefs that somebody has. I think 7 languages. Wow, that is incredible.
It's his context, isn't it? In her context, that was normal. And in our context, not speaking 1 is probably normalized.
We have
this belief that because we're British and we speak English and lots of the world speak English and businesses come out English, we don't need another language.
Yeah, no.
It's a belief. Unfortunately, there's a lot of evidence out there to say, well, you're all right with only 1 language. So people perpetuate that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now, I just want to pick up on something here. You mentioned, obviously, the cost of living crisis. As I've said before, I believe it's not a crisis. It's just we're more aware of it because it's always been there. I've worked in this world of money and indebtedness for long enough to know that this has been around for a long time. However, it's affecting more and more people. And we've seen a growing sort of in-work poverty, and so even sort of middle-income people are now feeling the pressure. One of the things that really struck me, though, is when somebody is feeling that pressure, that stress, and there's a tendency I've found for people to look at a situation, and there's a lot going on at the moment, from interest rates to fuel prices, the cost of energy, food prices going up, and, in some cases, ridiculous amounts. And also we keep getting told, because we're hearing the messages from the likes of the media, like the BBC and so on, who love to catastrophize, that, come April, we're going to see another price hike in energy bills. And so you can quite understand why people, and some people in particular, maybe looking at that and panicking in themselves. And when they panic, that's when they start to catastrophize. It's almost like they create a world that's not happened. And in often cases, no evidence will happen, but to them it's real. And it causes immense amount of stress.
I think you're absolutely right. So when we're looking at stress, we're looking at the pro-social domain. We're looking at listening to the news. We're listening to other people's stories, and our brain's getting hijacked. And we're switching from abundance mindset to that scarcity mindset, and we're focusing on all things that we don't have. I don't have the data on the truth of the cost of living. I see in different places that I can question, is that one? Because the restaurants are full. People are still driving cars. But I know it must exist. But I personally, I'm seeing it in care homes where people are earning minimum wage.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it generally, but I do feel that the government the government share a negative story, the press and the media do too. And you're right, I think that exacerbates and compounds. And then suddenly everyone's feeling that tension, even though it's not their reality. So I don't know everybody's individual reality, but I suppose the idea is that we need to just stop listening to things that don't help us, find out how we are, how we feel, what our situation is, and get to that place where we can make good decisions rather than being hijacked by all the stories.
Just following on from that theme, it's like a question that you could ask: why is it that bad news sells? And it sells very well.
It's because, it's an age old. Our brains have a negativity bias. It's why humans are still here. If we are walking along the savannah, when we were hunters and gatherers, and we're looking, and we only pay attention to the seeds and the nuts and the fruits, and we don't keep an eye on the danger, we are likely to get consumed by a beast, whether a saber-toothed tiger or an approaching tribe. So in order to survive, any animal needs to pay attention to the threat.
Yeah.
We are biased towards that, but in our modern world, we don't have saber-toothed tigers. We have different threats. But our brain behaves as if those threats are more dangerous than they really are. It's how we, I think Rick Hansen does a lot of work on that. He says that our brains are Velcro for negative.
Yeah.
Everything sticks, and they're Teflon for positive.
Yeah.
We can't, again, it's back to that, how the brain works and how we can direct our own experience and our own energy to create new pathways which are more positive. We have to pay attention. We have to, it has to be a deliberate act. And then we can rewire our brains so that we access those positive pathways, those neural pathways in our brain and body. But by default, we will have negative pathways because those are keeping us alive and surviving.
And that's so I would say to anybody listening, if you are feeding yourself all the media, whether that's printed media, TV media or online media, are selling you, and you know that it's not really doing you any good, you need to stop. That yes, we want to know where the danger's coming from so we can be prepared, but what we're actually doing is creating a world around us that's actually sapping the life out of us. And if we want, and if we're intentional about it, there are things that we can do to change our outlook on life, to see and be more receptive to the positives. It's interesting, Andrea, that you can say to somebody, you were very good at that. And all of a sudden they become all coy and, I'm just doing my bit. And you're thinking, we're kind of loath to say, well, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you've noticed.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things is that, financial well-being and money are just one area of our stress load. But interestingly, there's a great person called Deb Garner, and she really looks at the work of Stephen Porges, and she has a concept called story follows state. So we've been watching something, and because our body is taking in signals, or it could be from sleep, or it could be watching the news story changes our state. And because our state has changed, and now we're more alert and more tense, that changes the way our brain works. And now our brain is telling ourselves a story. Oh, we don't have enough of that, whether it's time, whether it's money or social connections. And when we allow that story to be replayed, that pathway to be reused, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
So when I'm working with individuals, when I'm working companies, I'm teaching people recognize and be aware of when something has triggered a state change in you. Switch off that alarm, and then your story will change.
So how do you, if you don't mind me asking, how would you encourage or direct somebody to learn how to switch off that alarm?
I mean, the neuroscience points strongly that we have our breath. It would be using our breath,
right?
Using our posture and using social connection, because we all have our breath all the time. It's always with us, and it's one of our systems that's that can be, if we're deliberate about it, be under our conscious control. So I know when I get triggered by a traffic jam, or by someone saying something to me, or by a tense situation, I know that if I consciously breathe into my nose, and I can switch off the alarm, I can just calm my body down. And I know that all the neuromechanisms that are happening, but you don't need to know all the mechanisms. You don't need to know the neuroscience. You just need to practice using the breath to switch off the alarm, to change your state that allows you to use your thinking brain to create a new story and a new neural pathway.
I just on that, I completely agree with you, because I've used those exercises myself, and they definitely do work. And also, going right back to the beginning, we talked about how stress can impede our ability to think rationally and logically and make those good decisions. By using some of those exercises, we can actually put ourselves back in a state where we can think rationally and logically and look at the facts of a situation, not the thoughts and opinions and the emotions of it.
I think it's giving us that space. I mean, I think Viktor Frankl, the space between the stimulus and the response, and that it could be for money decision, it could be for food, it could be for alcohol, it could be for all sorts of decisions we make moment to moment. But if you notice as an individual that you're making decisions that you later regret, that wasn't helpful, or that wasn't what I intended, that would indicate to me that you're making a decision, you're reacting.
Yes.
You're reacting to keep yourself safe. So I'm not judging you on that. I'm making you aware of it. So at that point, you kind of go, well, every time I reach for that bottle of wine in the evening, because I'm feeling tense, and then I have 3 glasses and I don't sleep very well and I wake up groggy, there's something with that behavior that's impacting me beyond that first mouthful. When I reach for that glass of wine, that's when I need the pause. What else can I do? Or when I'm reaching for, I'm putting my credit card down to pay for something that I might not need, whatever it might be. It's any behavior. The behavior from the end of a journey, sensations. We have our perception of those sensations. We then have our emotions and our thoughts, not all conscious, and then we have behavior.
Yeah.
All behavior comes all of those other aspects that we need to be more aware of in order to change the thing on the top.
Yeah, and not that our listeners can see me smiling, but I am smiling because as you're saying what you're saying, Andrea, I'm just thinking about, I am terrible with chocolate. If I think, it's a tough day, and suddenly I see an advert about chocolate, or somebody mentions chocolate, I'm thinking, that's what I need. I need a bar of chocolate.
And each of us will have our own little things that we reflexively go to make ourselves feel better.
Yeah.
And we're not consciously doing it. It's reflexive, because the human brain and body likes to conserve energy. It doesn't want to use, and also it doesn't like feeling yucky. So when we feel yucky, we look for something in the short term to make ourselves feel better.
Just to, I suppose, bring our sort of conversation to a close as time's passing us by, but it's picking up on the fact that you can create new neural pathways. So where people say, well, this is who I am, as though I am who I am, I can't change, that's it. And actually, that's not true. We all have, if we are intentional about it, the ability to change. I've got a really good little story about this as well. And it was one from my wife, and she won't mind me telling the story, but for many years, she used to be a pharmaceutical rep, and she would sort of traipse up and down the motorways to different places that she would visit, and clients and so on that she would see. And on one occasion, she was traveling up the motorway, and a car pulled right in front of her and sort of cut her up. So all of a sudden, the sort of, I suppose the emotion, the anger emotion, the animal behind the steering wheel,
calls her up.
Came to the fore. She quickly whipped out and overtook this person, only to find that it was a friend of hers that she'd overtook, and she felt really, really guilty. And we often sort of smile about this story, but she did something that was quite remarkable, and it transformed the way she would respond to people who do similar things from then onwards. And that was, she took it as a sign, this person is probably having a difficult day. I need to speak something good over their lives. And that's what she started doing. So now, listeners, I can well imagine some of you thinking, what? And being rather sort of puzzled by it, or maybe concerned. But at the end of the day, she was actually rewriting those neural pathways, because rather than responding how you would normally want to respond, how dare they cut me up like this? She wanted to change her behavior, her response. And so she intentionally took it as a sign, I need to speak something good over their lives, because nobody knows what's going on in their lives.
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? You know, when we're all walking around with a very long neurobiological history, we don't know how someone slept the night before, what sort of child they had, what we don't know. So when we meet people in the street and they behave in a way that we don't approve of or like, we have to remember, if we had their story, we would probably behave in the same way.
We could quite well do that, yes.
So that's about compassion.
Yes.
That compassion for the other person, but also compassion for ourselves. Because I know I've got 4 children. Sometimes I don't always behave in the way I'm proud of. And often it's because I've had a hard day, I'm in a rush, whatever. But I'm compassionate with myself. Well, of course you behave like that because of X, Y, and Z. But the goal is, be aware of that, be kind to yourself, apologize to the kids, and repair that rupture, and learn for next time there's a better way of doing that. Yeah,
I completely agree. And really, on that note, I have to say thank you so much, Andrea, for your valuable time. It's been really interesting having a conversation with you. I know, I feel like, we could go on. There's so much you could unpack, and I know the realm of the brain is huge in terms of the complexity and so on. And I suppose at the end of the day, we have to admit we don't necessarily understand everything about it. We're all different. We're all unique individuals, and there are varying nuances. So one is, if somebody is behaving in a manner that you perhaps don't approve, don't immediately judge them, because there might be something else going on in their lives that you know nothing about, and they're just trying to cope with it. Or like my wife, the drivers among us who don't like people cutting us up, just have a think next time somebody does.
Yeah, I think my favorite quote I give to my children is, if you have a choice between being right and being kind, choose kind.
Yeah. That's a very good note to end on. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming and joining me on Wisdom Chat.
You're welcome, Phil. Love to see you. Thank you.
And you. Take care. Bye-bye.